Hello, Mum, again. Now it's another one, Chapter 5, Unveiling Horn Head. This is one of my favourites. Okay, so it's a great pity that Grandma is the only member of the family who remembers the unveiling. Granddaddy, having been the organiser of it, was of course there, but Trevor, who was the only child at the time, was only 2 years old, and hence took no part in such events. Nevertheless, the unveiling was important, retrospectively, to all the children, since the horn head painting was part of their house and has always been part of their lives since they can remember. And now, of course, sits engraved on that wall. So, the unveiling came about in the following manner. One day back in 1933, when Grandaddy and Grandma had almost finished rebuilding Skibbereen and were hoping to move in before too long, Grandaddy met an old friend in the street in Belfast. This was James Humbert Craig, with whom, before he was married, he used to go fishing. James, who was several years older than Grandaddy, had taught the latter a lot about fishing. He wore a tweed hat with a few flies stuck into the band. Not only was he a keen fisherman, but one of Ireland's leading landscape painters. He greeted Grandaddy with the words, "I haven't seen you for a long time, Austin, and I hear that you've got yourself married. Congratulations, and I'm sorry not to have given you a present. It's never too late, though." "What do you mean? What do you want?" Grandaddy agreed that he had got married, and that he'd be delighted if James would do him just a wee painting. "Splendid," said James. "What kind of painting?" "Oh," replied Grandaddy, "anything you like, with perhaps a bit of sea and sky and maybe some hills." "It's as good as done," said James. So later that same week, Grandaddy brought home a copy of the Ideal Home magazine, on the front of which was a picture of a wide fireplace with a painting over the mantelpiece, while on the other side were wooden cupboards. The painting and the cupboards were built in to be part of the wall, giving a very pleasing effect. That's how our library fireplace could look, with James' picture built in over the fireplace. I'm going to take it in tomorrow to show to him. Grandma said it looked very attractive, but that something far bigger than just a wee painting would be required. "That won't matter," said Grandaddy. "I'll pay him to make a big one." Next day, when James saw the cover of the Ideals Homes in his studio, it gave him, as he said, a terrible shock. Nothing daunted, however, he said he would have to hire a bigger studio to enable him to stand back to view the picture as he worked. One day he brought Grandaddy and Grandma into the new studio to see it and the painting. Although it wasn't yet finished, they were thrilled by it and got very excited. Grandaddy said there would have to be an unveiling ceremony and that James should come with his fiddle. Meanwhile, the hall of the library had been prepared to receive the painting, an oak frame having been fixed to the wall, while cupboards matching the natural oak panelling of the walls flanked the stone fire mantelpiece. The painting, under James' supervision, had been placed beside the oblong of the frame and an oak beading laid on to hide the join. The effect was stunning, and everyone stood back to admire it. James, Grandaddy and Grandma, and a joiner, little Trevor, and Nanny Chalmers. It was so exciting that then and there a day was planned for the unveiling, the 25th of February, 1934. When the big day came, the house was prepared for the party, and Grandaddy hung a sheet over the picture. A few choice friends who'd been invited gathered to watch Grandma, perched on a ladder, make an unsteady job of drawing the sheet to one side. Everyone clapped, and a toast was drunk, no doubt in Bush, to the painter, who then got out his fiddle and struck up such lively tunes that even Grandaddy and Grandma couldn't keep their feet still. The rug was rolled back, and the party was off to a merry start. After tea had been served, Grandaddy asked James to tell the story of his trip as a very young man to America. James agreed, and could have kept the assembled company enthralled the whole night long with his story. Grandma regrets that she can't convey the sound of his voice, a wonderful storytelling voice. Here, as far as she can remember, is the story. James and Big Billy Bowman decided to try their fortunes in America, so they booked a cabin in the steerage of an Atlantic liner. On the second day out, it became so rough that many passengers were seasick. Not the two young men, however, though they were greatly distressed by the crying of a child in a cabin not far away. On going to investigate, they found a poor young woman too sick and weak to look after her little child, which Grandaddy and Grandma reckoned to have been about a year old. not old enough to walk, but old enough to handle and gnaw a chicken leg. They told the young woman that if she would let them have the child, they could undertake to look after it. So the 2 young bachelors bore the child away to their cabin and asked the steward to bring them every day a whole cooked chicken and a quantity of Guinness, as you would, wouldn't you? As soon as the first instalment of these ailments arrived, they cut off a drumstick and handed it to the child, who attacked it with ravenous appetite. They then gave it some Guinness to wash down the chicken. This also was eagerly welcomed, and when hunger and thirst had been allayed, the child dropped off to sleep in James's bunk. He and Big Billy Bowman agreed that they should take it in turn and turn about. So that night it was Big Billy Bowman's turn. Never so much a whimper was heard. No wonder with all that Guinness. The sea continued rough for several days, during which the child seemed to thrive on the treatment it was receiving, not tiring of its diet of chicken and Guinness. James and Billy decided that they were born nursemaids, and when the storm at last abated and the seasick passengers began to crawl up on deck, the mother came to fetch her child, exclaiming with delight and gratitude that she'd never seen it so much improved. There's the answer. On arrival in New York, James and Big Billy Bowman set out to find work. Grandma doesn't know what happened to the latter, but James called a painter's agency. When asked what kind of painting he could do, he replied that he was accustomed to doing fine and delicate work. So he was sent off to do some decorating in a house that a millionaire had built in Riverside Drive. Unfortunately, this job came to an end, and the only one available was painting the ironwork of Brooklyn Bridge. When James reported for work early in the morning at the bridge, he was fastened into a boatswain's chair and lowered down over the parapet. The end of the rope which was fastened to the chair was given into the hands of a mate, and soon James was red-leading happily away on the great iron structure. Suddenly his equanimity was shattered when the boatswain's chair plunged downward toward the water and came to a sudden shuddering stop. The man holding the end of the rope on top of the bridge had been so frightened by seeing a man jump off that he had let go of the rope. Fortunately for James, the rope had a safety stop, which had pulled him up short with a violent jerk. He had enough of Brooklyn Bridge and signalled that he wanted to be pulled up. He sought work elsewhere. James announced this was a good place to end the story. His audience didn't agree with him, but since it was now late, it was decided that it was time to go home. It had been a memorable evening. For Grandma and her family, James Craig's painting of Hornhead has not ceased since that evening and will never cease to be a joy. And P.S. is James insisted that in spite of its exaggerated size, the painting should still be a present. Dear love him. Okay, right, that ends that, chapter 5. Well done, Mum.